Good morning, America. The Mueller report is out. New battles are brewing. This morning, calls for Robert Mueller and Attorney General Barr to testify after the release of the special counsel's report, revealing 11 episodes of possible obstruction, laying out how President Trump repeatedly tried to interfere in the Russia probe and get his aides to fire the special counsel, and the moment he said he thought his presidency was over. Overnight, President Trump proclaims victory.
I'm having a good day, too.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi swearing Congress will not be silent. And this morning, the head of the House Judiciary Committee is here. Will he start impeachment proceedings?
Also this morning, deadly storms on the move. 3 people killed overnight as reported twisters tear through the South. Now schools closed in Georgia and Florida as the threat moves east this holiday.
As Christians around the world prepare for Easter, new clues about what started the fire, devastating the historic Notre Dame Cathedral, what investigators are now revealing.
And an ABC News exclusive. Incredible video inside that daring cave rescue, the moment that diver is finally found, lost and trapped inside. And a dangerous escape only on GMA this morning.
Live in Times Square, this is Good Morning America.
And good morning, America. Thanks for joining us on this Good Friday, a Good Friday where we are dealing with all the fallout from the Mueller report.
Take a look at this, the 448-page report in such demand this morning. Harvard Bookstore says copies are selling as fast as they can be printed.
448 pages, a few big bottom lines. Mueller confirmed that Russia interfered in our election, made repeated contacts with Trump associates, but did not conclude that the Trump team engaged in a criminal conspiracy with Russia. Mueller clearly wrote that he could not exonerate Trump on the question of obstruction of justice. Here is the key quote. If we had confidence after a thorough investigation of the facts that the president clearly did not commit obstruction of justice, we would so state. Based on the facts and the applicable legal standards, however, we are unable to reach that judgment. The special counsel spun off 14 other criminal investigations. 12 of those are still secret.
And our political team has been covering every angle of this story. So let's start with our chief White House correspondent, Jonathan Karl in Washington. Good morning, John.
Good morning, Amy. The president is firing back at the special counsel's suggestion that he may have obstructed justice by saying that if he wanted to, he could have pulled the plug on the entire investigation, but he didn't.
President Trump was in a celebratory mood as he greeted supporters after touching down in Florida for Easter weekend.
Game over, folks. Now it's back to work.
The president ignored reporters' questions on Mueller's final report. But overnight, he offered a stern rebuttal to Mueller's suggestion that he may have obstructed justice by trying to curtail the investigation. I had the right to end the whole witch hunt if I wanted, the president tweeted. I could have fired everyone, including Mueller, if I wanted. I chose not to. I had the right to use executive privilege. I didn't. The Mueller report finds insufficient evidence to prove the Trump campaign coordinated with the Russians in their effort to meddle in the 2016 election. The report also offers vivid details about the investigation from start to finish, describing the moment then Attorney General Jeff Sessions informed Trump a special counsel had been appointed. The president slumped back in his chair and said, "Oh my God, this is terrible. This is the end of my presidency." On obstruction of justice, Mueller outlines 11 instances that raise concerns about the president's actions. One of the most glaring, Mueller says the president pressured then White House counsel Don McGahn to have Mueller himself fired. The president called McGahn at home and directed him to call the acting attorney general, Rod Rosenstein. The report reads, "Call Rod, tell Rod that Mueller has conflicts and can't be the special counsel." McGahn recalled the president telling him, "Mueller has to go. Call me back when you do it." McGahn refused, deciding he would resign rather than trigger what he regarded as a potential Saturday night massacre. Weeks later, the president denied even thinking about firing Mueller.
Mr. President, have you thought about or considered leading to the dismissal of the special counsel?
I haven't given it any thought.
The report details several other cases of senior advisors declining to take actions that could have obstructed justice. The president's staff ultimately may have saved him by ignoring his orders. The president's efforts to influence the investigation were mostly unsuccessful, Mueller writes, but that is largely because the persons who surrounded the president declined to carry out orders or accede to his requests. The report cites at least 7 different individuals close to the president, including McGahn, who declined to do what he asked regarding the investigation. The report also documents several instances where the president or his senior advisors made public statements related to the investigation that were not true, including this assertion by Press Secretary Sarah Sanders about the firing of James Comey.
The rank and file of the FBI had lost confidence in their director.
What's your response to these rank and file FBI agents who disagree with your contention that they lost faith in Director Comey?
Look, we've heard from countless members of the FBI that say very different things.
Sanders told the special counsel team that claim, a claim she repeated several times, wasn't founded on anything, but was a slip of the tongue made in the heat of the moment.
President Trump has often boasted that he has one of the best memories of all time, but in his written answers to questions from the special counsel, he seems unable to remember much of anything, using variations of the phrases, "I do not recall," "I do not remember," "I have no recollection," more than 30 times, virtually, George, in answers to every question.
John Carl, thanks very much. Let's bring in the White House press secretary now, Sarah Sanders. Sarah, thank you for joining us this morning. You said last night that the president is completely exonerated, no collusion, no obstruction. But Robert Mueller very explicitly wrote that the report does not exonerate the president. And we just showed that quote earlier where he lays out that he could not clear the president of obstruction of justice.
He couldn't, but he left that decision up to the Attorney General, and he made it. There was no collusion, which is what the entire investigation was supposed to be about. It was to determine whether or not the president or anybody on his campaign had colluded with Russia. And not only did they determine that the president hadn't and that his campaign didn't, but they determined that no American had colluded with Russia. And I find it astonishing that the media isn't thrilled about the fact that no American colluded with the foreign government. It's almost, you watched over the last 24, 48 hours as members of the Democrat Party and liberal media, their liberal media allies, were almost sorrowful that something bad didn't happen.
Sarah, that was the first
as
headline.
a foreign agent for the Russian
Sarah,
government.
that was the first headline we had in our hellos right there, saying he didn't reach the conclusion there was a criminal conspiracy. But what the report also does is expose a culture of lying at the White House, the president lying, telling others to lie, and it calls your personal credibility into question as well. We showed that clip from your May 10th press conference where you said it was a slip of the tongue when you talked about countless FBI members, yet you repeated it twice the very next day. Here's one of them.
I mean, really? Like,
I mean,
so are we talking
between like email, text messages? Absolutely,
50,
yes.
60, 70?
Look, we're not going to get into a numbers game.
That's not a slip of the tongue, Sarah. That's a deliberate false statement.
Actually, if you look at what I said the slip of the tongue was in using the word countless. But there were a number of FBI, both former and current, that agreed with the president's decision. And they've continued to speak out and say that and send notice to the White House of that agreement with the president's decision. James Comey was a disgraced leaker and used authorization to spy on the Trump campaign, despite there was no evidence of collusion.
You said something else to the special counsel.
I stand by the fact, George.
Sarah, hold on a second. The special counsel writes that those comments were not founded on anything. That's what you talked to the special counsel about when you were facing criminal penalties if you didn't tell the truth, but now you're trying to walk away from it. Why can't you acknowledge that what you said then was not true?
I said that the word I used, countless, and I also said if you look at what's in quotations for me, it's that, and it's that it was in the heat of the moment, meaning that it wasn't a scripted talking point. I'm sorry that I wasn't a robot like the Democrat Party that went out for 2.5 years and stated time and time again that there was definitely Russian collusion between the president and his campaign, that they had evidence to show it, and that the president and his team deserved to be in jail, that he shouldn't be in office, when really they were the ones that were creating the greatest scandal in the history of our country.
In fact, Sarah, what you did repeat time, Sarah, hold on a second. I let you speak. What you did repeat time and time again is that statement. You said that countless FBI officials came to you. You repeated it on separate days, on separate occasions, and this was not the only instance the special counsel reported. They also talked about one of the statements you made about the president's statement about the Trump Tower meeting, where you said the president clearly did not dictate that statement, yet the president's lawyers, according to the report, wrote that the president did indeed dictate that statement. So why did you tell the press that the president did not dictate that statement when he did?
If you look at the play-by-play account, he weighed in, which I said that he did. He relayed information he wanted included, which took place.
Dictate it.
I'm not denying that he had involvement in what the statement said. That was the information I was given at the time, and I stated it to the public. The big question here was whether or not the Trump campaign colluded with Russia. They didn't. The president didn't. This has been a 2.5-year witch hunt that has hurt our country, and it should never happen to another American president.
I agree.
It is disgraceful what has
Sarah,
taken place, and
you
the
said,
amount of time and money and energy that has been spent on this.
You said the president did not dictate that statement after consulting with the president. So did he tell you that, and why did you repeat that to the country?
Again, as I stated before, he weighed in as anybody would do, and that seems consistent with what took place that day. He weighed in on the statement. I know that there were changes that were made ultimately, but the big question was whether or not
that's just not what happened. You said the president didn't dictate the statement. The president's lawyer said that he did dictate the statement. That's what they wrote. That is true, correct?
He hadn't dictated, but that he weighed in, George.
So the president's lawyers weren't telling the truth.
I'm sorry, I lost the last part of what you asked.
Well, then you're saying the president's lawyers didn't tell the truth when they wrote that the president dictated the statement.
I'm telling you the information I had was that the president had weighed in on the statement, which he clearly did.
Sarah Sanders, thanks for joining us this morning.
The big takeaway that I think that we saw yesterday and that we've seen over the last 2.5 years is that there wasn't collusion with Russia, and it should be a day that every American can celebrate and not be sorrowful like we've seen over the last 48 hours from the Democrats that are actually sad that the president didn't work as a foreign agent. And I hope that you'll push Adam Schiff and some of the others just as hard to produce the evidence that they say they've had over collusion and obstruction and all these other things that they've claimed over the last 2.5 years. And I hope that collectively as a country we can move on, because great things can happen under this president, just as they have over the last 2.5 years.
Sarah Sanders, thanks for your time this morning. Cecilia?
Okay, George, there's still more to come on Capitol Hill. House Democrats invited Robert Mueller to testify next month, and they are now demanding a fully unredacted version of his report. Senior congressional correspondent Mary Bruce is on Capitol Hill with the very latest. And Mary, the big question this morning, will this lead to impeachment proceedings?
Well, Cecilia, Democrats say this report is severely damaging to the president, but for now, they are not rushing to impeachment. Democrats, though, feel that this report outlines disturbing evidence that they say shows the president obstructed justice, and they feel it is far worse than how the attorney general has been describing it. Democrats are making it very clear they are fed up with Bill Barr. They say he is mischaracterizing this report to benefit the president, and now they want to hear from Mueller himself, asking him to testify here on the Hill next month. They want to hear directly from Mueller why he felt he couldn't make a call on the question of obstruction of justice, and whether he agrees with the attorney general in his belief that the president should be cleared. When it comes to the issue of obstruction, George and Cecilia, Democrats feel that the ball is now in their court to make a determination, and they are still demanding that full report and the underlying evidence, and they do plan to subpoena to get it. This fight is far, far from over.
We're going to talk to one of those top Democrats now. Thank you, Mary. The chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, Jerry Nadler. Congressman, thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
This morning, you just heard Sarah Sanders, the White House press secretary. She says that the White House reading of the Mueller report and the Attorney General's reading of the Mueller report is that he left the decision of obstruction to the Attorney General, who made it rightly.
Well, that's just wrong. I mean, it's another one of the lies that Sarah Sanders and lots of people in the administration have been making. Mueller, the special prosecutor, made very clear that he couldn't reach a determination on obstruction of justice, basically because of certain Justice Department guidelines, which didn't allow him to do that, but that he laid it out for Congress. for Congress to do, not for the Attorney General to arrogate to himself the power to do it. The Attorney General has revealed himself, Barr has revealed himself as an agent of the President, not the Attorney General of the entire American people. He's a defense attorney for the people. He clearly misled over a period of 4 weeks from the March 24th letter right through his press conference yesterday. He consistently misled the American people as to what was in the report. He said that they found no collusion, whereas the special prosecutor specifically said collusion is not a legal term, and he didn't make any finding. He said we hadn't reached a finding on criminal conspiracy.
Do you accept that finding from Robert Mueller that there was no criminal conspiracy?
Well, he wasn't able to prove a criminal conspiracy, and one of the reasons he said he wasn't able to do it was that lots of people destroyed evidence, perjured themselves. So I accept his conclusion that he couldn't prove it.
And based on the reading 188 pages of evidence or so on obstruction of justice, do you believe the president committed obstruction of justice?
I believe he committed obstruction of justice, yes, but it's not up to me. It's up to
You're the chairman of the Judiciary Committee.
Yeah,
you can open impeachment proceedings. Well,
we have to, but we're not there. We have to now, because because Barr misled the country, we have to hear from Barr, which we will on May 2nd. We have to hear from Mueller, and ask him a lot of questions. We have to hold hearings and hear from other people, both on the question of obstruction of justice, where, as I said, the special prosecutor invited Congress to look into that, not the Attorney General. We have to look into all that. We need the entire report, unredacted, and the underlying documents in order to make informed decisions. And after we get that, and we will subpoena that entire report today.
That subpoena is coming today?
That subpoena will come in the next couple of hours,
including
yes.
the grand jury evidence?
Including the grand jury evidence, yes. Because we have to see the entire report. And by the way, in every previous instance, Congress has seen all the evidence. The Attorney General in previous instances, both with Clinton, with Nixon, went to court with the...
right, but that's not going to happen here. And a lot of legal experts believe you'd be on much stronger ground to get that grand jury evidence if you actually opened an official impeachment proceeding.
Yes. Some people believe that. I believe that one of the things that we need that evidence for is to determine whether to do that or not. We have to determine what the proper course of action is to deal with a president who's been shown in this report, very clearly shown to lie all the time, culture of lying, to have, if not colluded with, well, in the plain meaning of the term, colluded with the Russians, not the criminal conspiracy. I mean, one of the things that the special prosecutor finds is that the Russians were clearly out to help Trump, that the Trump campaign knew about it and welcomed their assistance, and in some cases knew about what they were going to do, and what WikiLeaks was going to do in advance. They couldn't prove criminal conspiracy, but they were certainly proving cooperation. That is very disturbing, to cooperate with a foreign power.
And that is all we have time for today. Congressman, thanks very much for your time this morning. Cecilia?
Okay, George, we're following several other major headlines this morning on this Good Friday. The very latest on the devastation at Notre Dame. Next, what investigators now believe may have sparked that fire.
And then that dramatic cave rescue. We have exclusive footage right here on GMA of that very moment the trapped diver was discovered and then pulled from the water. In the meantime, though, let's go to Ginger.
Yes, and so much severe weather to talk about. At least 10 reported tornadoes just in the last 24 hours. This damage from Morton, Mississippi shows you how strong these storms could be. This morning, we've already seen damaging winds plow through Atlanta, flash flooding happening as we speak. And today, a major area of our nation will see a moderate risk. That is the second highest risk area from South Carolina through Virginia. Let's get to the weekend getaways now, brought to you by Prudential.
This is Loma Linda, a place with one of the highest life expectancies in the country.
You see so many people walking around here, and they're hundreds.
So how do you stay financially well for all those extra years?
Well, you have to start planning as early as possible.
We all need to plan for 18 years or more of retirement.
I don't have a whole lot saved up, but I'm working on it now. I will do whatever I need to do.
Plan your financial life with Prudential. Bring your challenges. Stay weather aware today. Some strong to severe thunderstorms will come through, producing some high winds, potentially some heavy rain and flooding, and even the chance of seeing some isolated tornadoes from the afternoon overnight until 2 a.m. in the morning. Things will start drying out early Saturday. We'll get up to 70 degrees and 63 now, cooler for Easter Sunday. And as we go into next week, high temperature of 72 degrees, so some warmth there as we rise to 81 on Tuesday.
A lot more coming up this Friday morning, and we'll be right back.
I'm mildly obsessed with numbers. So I started with the stats regarding my moderate to severe plaque psoriasis. Like how Humira has been prescribed to over 300,000 patients, and how many patients saw